So I've got a question for you guys. Are meetings overrated? Well, recently a company tried this own experiment with their own employees, and we're going to take a look at the article and see whether it worked, what the results were, and whether other companies should also follow suit. So let's jump right in. So the title of this article says, Should Meetings Get the Boot? It goes, Workflow automator Zapier recently conducted an experiment where they gave employees a break from each other. All meetings were canceled during what they called a Get Stuff Done week, according to Fast Company. Asynchronous communication was the only correspondence among employees. Asynchronous communication basically means that they would not be able to communicate in real time. It says that the results of the experiment were overwhelmingly positive among staff, with an internal survey reporting 80% of respondents wanting to repeat it in the future. A key part of its success was goal setting and future-proofing one's work. All right, so let's take a look at the actual article and see what it says. All right, so looks like Zapier leadership, what they did was they canceled all of their internal meetings and they moved all of their conversations to asynchronous syncs instead. It says here that they communicated expectations and tips across Slack so everyone knew what to expect. Long story short, for one full week, the whole company canceled weekly team check-ins, one-on-ones, project kickoffs, and any other meetings that might have been on the docket. Instead, the information was gathered, consolidated, and shared asynchronously. For example, instead of a weekly one-on-one, they consolidated questions from the manager and sent them directly to the employee in a direct message on Slack. Instead of a project check-in, all team members share their updates in a relevant Asana task. Asana is a project management product tool for those of you guys that have never used it before. Instead of a one-off strategy call, stakeholders share their thoughts and comments in a Coda doc. Coda is basically like a Google Doc type of collaboration tool. Instead of a project kickoff call, our project manager sent a Slack message that shared the project charter, timeline, and next steps. It also says here, important bit, before Get Stuff Done week, everyone set personal goals for themselves. Some teams even share their goals publicly to help them feel more comfortable. Yeah, this is super interesting. Zapier, I've never heard of them before, but I'm assuming they're a tech company. And so I'm also assuming that a lot of their team members are still working virtually. And so they're probably still at home, and their primary way of communicating is probably through Slack or Zoom or Google Hangouts or some sort of a virtual meeting tool. And this is their experiment. My first initial reaction is it's super interesting. I think what I'm going to find out from the results is that they got a lot more stuff done. I think the other thing that's going to be an observation from the study is because there's not a lot of team meetings and regular syncs with people, I think they're going to be a lot more productive. They're going to produce a lot more, but there might be some lower scores in terms of satisfaction when it comes to actual interaction with team members. If you're talking about teams that are used to communicating and having face-to-face conversations, and when you take that away, they might express some displeasure or some dissatisfaction because they don't have that consistent communication with their teammates. So I think that might be a potential result, but let's continue to read on. Was it a success? So let's continue to scroll through the article. So there's some anecdotal information here, but let's actually skip to the data. It says here that the People Ops team sent out a survey and it collaborated some of the stories that they've heard. So 3 data points here. 80% of respondents would want to do another Get Stuff Done week in the future. So from a CSAT perspective, it sounds like it was a pretty successful experiment. It also says 80% of respondents achieved their goals for the week. And 89% of respondents found communication to be about as effective during GSD week as during a typical week. Now, I'm kind of curious how many people were part of this experiment. I don't know how big of a company Zapier is, and I don't think this article talks about how many people were part of that sample size. But I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that it was a relatively decent sample size with at least 100 employees to come up with these results. But 80%, 89%, I would say that's pretty strong support for the experiment that they did. It says that the survey also showed that 56% of participants canceled 1 to 5 hours of meetings and 26% canceled 5 to 10 hours. That translates to 1,000 to 3,000 hours of meeting time saved across the company in just 1 week. Given how costly meetings can be, that's a massive saving. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, guys. In my role, I'm in meetings pretty much half the day at least. Is all that time beneficial? No. Now, do I find meetings to be helpful? Absolutely, especially because our company is still remote and I work with people all across the country, even those outside the country. And so obviously you can't really meet with them in person physically in a conference room. And so having virtual conference rooms and virtual meetings are the only way to really communicate in real time. But I think a lot of meetings these days, even in the role that I'm in, they're just not really necessary. I think a lot of things can be done through Google Docs or through Coda, like the article mentioned. There's so many tools these days where you can work asynchronously and you can still get a lot of stuff done. Now, the question is, if people aren't really updating the docs or responding to emails, and they don't have that level of discipline, then it's going to create more effort for you or for the people who are trying to get things done. And so I think if you're going to try an experiment like this or make a decision to move in this type of direction, you need to make sure that the company is aligned and that leadership is setting very specific boundaries in terms of what the expectations are so that people are getting things done asynchronously, responding to emails, and so on and so forth. Because that's really the only way you can be efficient and be productive. Let's continue to read on. It says that the tips for a successful GSD week is number 1, set goals. Having specific goals for what you'll achieve during the week makes it much more likely that you'll use those extra hours productively. Oh yeah, of course. I mean, if you're not setting the goals up front and people are just doing whatever they think is important and the priority, then you're not going to be aligned and you're probably going to waste a lot more time. Number 2, go async. No meeting week doesn't mean no communication week. Before you start, figure out which asynchronous channel you'll use to do which type of work. Yeah, I mean, if you're not going to be able to use Slack or Zooms or whatnot, I mean, there's obviously going to be other tools, Asana, Coda, Google Docs, other tools that you can use to keep track of the flow and who's doing what. And so if people are trained and aware of these tools and using them to its fullest ability, that's where I think a lot of the magic can happen. It also says here, future-proof your work. I use some of my extra hours to set up systems that would help me during non-GSD weeks. For example, I updated my Zap. What is that? Our word for automated workflows that sends an item from Slack to my to-do list in Notion. By building systems like that, I gave myself a few hours back during weeks with meetings too. Yeah, I mean, setting up workflows, right? Automating and creating standard operating procedures. I mean, this is something that you have to do, especially when you work with a distributed team in many different locations. If you want to make something repeatable or if you want to take a complicated workflow with multiple steps, you have to create an SOP. Otherwise, there's going to be mistakes. People are going to try to recreate it, and it's just going to create a lot of confusion. And so that time that you put up front to creating a system or creating a workflow or some sort of an SOP doc, especially when it's not very clear what the steps are, I found this to be super helpful for my own job. Lastly, it says, figure out which meetings matter. One of the goals of the GSD week is to determine which meetings are truly beneficial. We cut the meetings that we didn't miss and made sure we found extreme value in the calls we did keep on our calendars. Yeah, I mean, not all meetings are created equally, guys. You know, some meetings are kind of pointless, and there's always that one person on the team that's just setting up meetings for the sake of meetings, and they don't have a clear agenda. They don't have a clear plan. They sometimes add people that shouldn't be there or miss adding people. And so there's meeting etiquette, there's meeting rules. And if you're not aligned there, and if you have a team that doesn't really know how to even set or run meetings, then I think it can be an inefficient use of time. You know, one of the areas where I find meetings to also just be not living up to its full potential is when people don't track of minutes. They don't track action items and follow-ups. And it's just like you talk about it in the meeting, but then no one actually records it. No one actually sends out the minutes and says that, okay, these are the 2 or 3 things that we decided on, and here are the next steps, and here's who's doing what. If you don't have that level of discipline, then I think meetings can also just waste a lot of time, and you have to have repeat meetings to go through that over and over again. Yeah, I mean, this was a pretty interesting experiment. I think most companies could probably learn from this. I would love to have something like this also in my company. Amazon is a company that tends to index a lot more on meetings, and maybe it's just because we're in this, you know, post-COVID environment where people are still distributed and working remotely. But I do think clearing the calendars and having, you know, days or maybe weeks, you know, I think weeks is probably stretching it, but having days where it's just focused work time and it's just a no meeting block on your calendar where people can't schedule, I think that's also useful. But I mean, it also depends on the role and the function, guys. I mean, sometimes there are roles where you just need to communicate. And sometimes it's just not practical to be able to work in a doc or in Coda or in Notion or in some of these collaboration tools. And you need to have people providing their inputs in real time to get things done. But those are just kind of my initial thoughts. What do you guys think? Are meetings overrated? Do you think something like a GSD would work for your company? Drop a comment down below, like this video, and subscribe if you haven't. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.